Twice on Full Measure, we've profiled the anti-Trump resistance movement. Today, our cover story is a fascinating look at the flip side of the coin. Blacks, gays, and other constituents who traditionally belong to Democrats are leading movements to walk away from that political party. We begin with the founder of the Black Exit from the Democratic Party, 30-year-old Candace Owens.
This will be the spot. I think the podium will be gone.
We caught up with Candace Owens just before a recent crowd-pleasing appearance in the heart of Baltimore, where her fans lined up outside.
It's time for, Black people to leave the Democratic Party, leave the plantation.
We're working to get blacks to quit the Democratic Party. We need to leave.
Hello. The media has played a very sour role in hurting the relationships between all races.
In simple terms, explain what Blexit is.
The Black Exit from the liberal agenda is really what Blexit is.
While there may not have been an awful lot of reporting about black support for President Trump, it turns out it's quite a thing on social media.
I am not a big dumb, I am not oppressed. They can take a shot, so I might just buy a vest. They said I want my MAGA hat, I told them say less. I bought the biggest MAGA hat, I did it just to flex.
Yeah, it's that MAGA girl. It should be obvious because you know that we run the world. And I got all these liberals steady hating on me.
So, started out a Democrat, it was a lot I didn't know. But then I read, I evolved and pop it to a different flow. Family told me keep quiet, you don't want to risk it, bro. What about your career?
Owens told me the story of why she decided to step forward and encourage other blacks to leave the Democratic Party. Though she's never voted, she says she always used to consider herself a Democrat.
Because black people are supposed to be Democrats. And then something happened during the 2016 election cycle where I woke up, and it was largely due to the fact that the media was going around calling Donald Trump a racist.
Donald Trump is a racist, xenophobic misogynist.
And they were really overplaying their hand on this one for me in particular, because I grew up listening to hip-hop music. Everybody loved Donald Trump. Everyone wanted to be like Donald Trump. Beyonce and Jay-Z were sipping poolside at Mar-a-Lago in their songs. And then suddenly he announces his bid for the White House, and Black America was supposed to suddenly realize that he was a racist. I was a little too smart for that assessment.
In August 2017, Owens launched a YouTube channel with a spoof about how hard it is for a young African American to confess she's conservative.
Mom, Dad, I think I might be a conservative. This is who I am.
If you believe that conservatives are racist and the liberals are your saviors, and suddenly you go through this awakening period, there's a lot of shock.
From post-Civil War through the early 20th century, Black Americans voted mostly Republican, the party of Lincoln. The biggest shift came in 1964 when President Lyndon Johnson, a Democrat, backed the Civil Rights Act. He got 94% of the black vote that year. No Republican has gotten more than 15% of the black vote since. Trump got just 8%. Owens is working to change that. What do you think, in your view, the Democrat Party has done wrong, or how has it failed the African American community?
Well, I would almost say, in terms of what they wanted to do, they've done everything right. What they wanted to do was to marry us to their party by giving us a bunch of handouts, making sure that we would never get ahead, and they were able to do that via the welfare system.
Owens now has 1.7 million followers on Twitter, and she's joined by other African Americans posting countless videos of support for President Trump.
I love my Trump supporters. I love my MAGA family.
Yeah, I'm black, I'm not Democrat. Be the MAGA hat. Ooh, we didn't try to take my guns. I can't go like that.
Yeah. How you gonna tell me who I should vote for? And why are you basing it on my skin color? Don't think.
Corey Field says there might be less than meets the eye when it comes to Blexit. He's an associate professor of sociology at Georgetown University and author of Black Elephants in the Room.
When you look at the Blexit movement, the platforms it has when people are talking about it, it's coming out of conservative circles. So I think, the movement in some ways has really resonated with folks on the political right.
who are already there.
Who are already there. Yeah, I think it's certainly an open question to how effective it's been in terms of changing minds. It also allows certainly certain messages that, pretty much operate as ways of chastising Black people to be delivered by Black voices. Like, Black people, stop complaining about racism and work harder. That message coming from a white person would be highly critiqued, strongly critiqued as racist and problematic, right, and troublesome. But that message coming from Candace Owens, right, gets to operate in a way where, can you call it racist? Because a Black person said it, so.
Some of the things that you say, if a white person said it, would be called racist. So some critics say you have been given license or given yourself license to say racist things because you're Black.
I think the one thing that I say that offends people is that I'm off the Democrat plantation, and I mean that in its literal interpretation. That is not a racist phrase. I believe that the Democrats have mirrored the same strategies that they used when Black Americans were slaves.
Are there great numbers? About the same time Candace Owens was having her awakening, something similar was happening to another lifelong Democrat, Brandon Strzok.
I was one of these people who was absolutely horrified, crying, shattered, and so upset that Donald Trump had been elected president because I voted for Hillary Clinton.
But Strzok says that as a gay man, he got to thinking.
While the media is telling me that Donald Trump and his supporters are bigots, racists, homophobes, what have you, I'm not really seeing it in reality anymore. And so I wanted to try to understand where it was, where the truth was, where we actually are with things. I've started hearing about these very valid, very real reasons why people supported Donald Trump.
What makes you different in terms of your mind was open to the idea that what you thought was true might not be? I don't think most people on either side feel that way.
So rather than spend the next 4 years of my life miserable, I wanted to find out if maybe things weren't as bad as they actually seemed, and it turns out they're not.
Gather around, walk away, walk away, walk away.
Strzok launched a movement he calls #WalkAway.
Once upon a time, I was a liberal. But liberalism has changed, and I will no longer be a part of an ideology or political party that represents everything that contradicts my values. Walk away.
Okay, and Mr. Clay, so we have two members who have not.
For those who make the switch, there's often a backlash. Owens says Democrats frequently attack and misrepresent her. This video clip, where she fires back at a congressional hearing, has about 4 million views online.
And the audacity of you to bring up the Christchurch shooting manifesto and make it seem as if I laughed at people that were slaughtered by a homicidal maniac is, in my opinion, absolutely despicable. And I think that we should be above that.
In terms of support that you've received from other Black Americans, what has that been like?
In the beginning, it was horrific. Uncle Tom, House Negro, Bedwench, all of the horrible racist stuff, all of the slurs that are launched against Black conservatives. But I knew that I was right. By then I had had my awakenings.
We at the White House right now. Turn around. Hey!
As for the man at the center of it all, well, President Trump has reached out to African Americans in events you won't often see on the evening news.
So I've been doing this for a long time. That is the loudest I've ever heard anything in this room. USA!
This was the line to get into a Black Leaders Summit at the White House. And there are other signs the movement to exit or walk away from the Democratic Party has lots of interest. This video is above 2 million views.
I'm afraid of that hat. Keep America great. For so many people, that's racism.
Yeah, but that's because of the mainstream media's narrative that's painted Donald Trump as a racist. I don't agree with the narrative.
You guys enjoying yourselves tonight? How amazing are you?
Meantime, Owens says she'll cast her first vote ever in 2020. It will be for Trump. How many other ex-Democrats will do the same? Unknown. Is there any way to tell how large of a movement it is or is not, people leaving the Democrat Party for the Republican Party because they like Trump?
The only true measure is going to be the exit polls of 2020, I think.
Some critics say there's not a mass exodus of Blacks leaving the Democrat Party. Blexit is more about white conservatives showing they can be inclusive, and you insulate the Republican Party against charges of racism.
Right. So what I always say to critics that say that is these are the same people that said that MAGA wasn't happening in the country. They're just completely wrong.
Why these white liberals trying to tell me who I am? Don't put me in groups cause I'm my own man. I said I wasn't Democrat.
The Trump campaign just launched a Black Voices for Trump coalition to recruit more supporters in 2020. Ahead on Full Measure, ISIS lost a leader and land last month, but the Islamic extremist terror group isn't gone. Scott Thuman gets chilling insight from an ISIS bride next. With its top leaders dead and its territory or caliphate gone, the Islamic extremist terrorist group ISIS isn't the threat it once was. But experts say the danger is far from over. Scott Thuman recently traveled overseas to bring us a rare interview with an ISIS bride who takes us inside the minds of terrorists.
First-hand accounts into a life under ISIS control are rare. We're calling this young woman Aisha. For her protection, we can't show you her face, but 4 years ago, at just age 19 and living in Morocco, she met a woman on Facebook who promised her a better life with a wealthy husband if she moved to Syria. She quickly realized, though, she was in ISIS territory.
So when you got there and you see this writing, a sign that says, "Welcome to the Islamic State," how scared are you?
I was scared, and I was terrified. I was shocked by the scene. Everybody was carrying guns. Even the small boys, they were carrying guns. The women were all veiled. I saw the Toyota pickup trucks with heavy machine guns. It was really terrifying.
After being held captive in a compound for ISIS brides, she met the man she would marry, an official in the terror group, and her life in the caliphate began.
There were some people who opposed their ideology, and they were killed, cutting off their heads and putting them on spikes in a public place for 3 days where people can come and see it, so it became an example for others.
What did that make you think when you see all of this happening?
Fear. I was afraid that one day my head would be among them. I was afraid and I wanted to go home.
What did you hear them say about the West, about America? What would they say?
Everywhere I go, I hear people talking. We will invade America. We'll also invade Rome and take their wives as slaves. We'll take their blondes. All their women will be our slaves.
Despite the recent death of their leader, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, after a U.S. Special Forces raid, and a major loss of their territory, the group's methods and goals haven't changed, according to Dr. Matthew Levitt, an expert on Islamist terrorism.
We got to their most senior leader, and that in and of itself is significant. At the same time, nobody really believes that Baghdadi was running the actual day-to-day. The insurgent attacks, the terrorism, those things were happening yesterday, they'll happen tomorrow. Baghdadi wasn't the one driving that.
So does this fall under the category of you can kill the man but not the message?
I think that's very much the case.
Proof may be in the numbers. They still, according to U.S. intelligence agencies, have some 14,000 fighters just in Iraq and Syria. They are spreading to other countries with 20 branches across the globe and are flush with cash.
How strong are the finances?
It was often referred to as the richest terrorist group we've ever known. We know that even as the Islamic State was still fighting on its last legs and was saying, we're not going to be beaten, we're not going to be beaten, they knew they were going to be beaten, and they started moving money outside Syria and Iraq, elsewhere in the region, investing it, hiding it, sometimes burying it underground. And so they have pre-positioned funds, at least in the $50 to $350 million range.
Is America still enemy number one?
Without a question. For the Islamic State, the West is the enemy, and the West is led by the United States. The Islamic State remains committed to the same things it was always committed to, and it wants to have a caliphate that is run by its very extreme perversion of Islamic law. But because it's lost that state in territorial defeat, it has not been defeated, but it's lost that land. its immediate priorities have shifted. And they think in much longer terms than we do. And their spokesperson at one point said, what is defeat? If we lose territory, are we defeated? Defeat means when you give up the fight. So long as we don't give up the fight, we're not defeated.
A mentality Aisha witnessed and knew she had to escape. Her husband did too. They split up and paid a smuggler to help. On her 10th attempt, she got to Turkey and eventually home.
Is there a message that you would want everyone to hear after your ordeal?
These people are just criminals, and they were trained by criminals. So they want to destroy the leadership of countries, and they want to be the only leaders. It is better to spend 5 years in jail in your own country than spend 1 day under ISIS rule.
When she got back to Morocco, did they put her in prison? Is that against the law?
She was initially, and she was interrogated for 12 days. But she is now home with her family, and despite the emotional and physical scars, she's relatively happy. But she is under constant supervision by police, as is anyone there who has spent time in ISIS territory.
Fascinating insight from her. Thanks, Scott. Coming up on Full Measure, Energy Secretary Rick Perry is a key player in the Democrats' impeachment effort of President Trump. James Rosen speaks with him next. In the coming days, we'll have the first public hearings on the impeachment inquiry into President Trump. Democrats allege he improperly withheld U.S. military aid to pressure Ukraine to dig up dirt on Democrats. Trump says he legitimately pressed for an investigation into corruption involving Ukraine and Democrats. James Rosen joins us with an interview with a key player in all of this, Energy Secretary Rick Perry.
Sharyl, Perry has refused to give closed-door testimony, but he spoke to me this week. The Energy Secretary spent the past few years as a point man for the Trump administration on Ukraine and its energy sector. In fact, it was Perry who set up the president's now famous phone call with the Ukrainian president that is at the heart of the impeachment probe. By May of this year, Mr. Trump was rebuffing efforts by Perry to set up a meeting with the Ukrainians and told Perry to call President Trump's private attorney, Rudy Giuliani, to find out why. You asked him, in essence, as directed by President Trump to ask him, why isn't he willing to sit down with the Ukrainians at this time? Mr. Giuliani, according to what you've said previously, basically replied to your inquiry by saying that, look, the president is really concerned that there are people in Ukraine that tried to beat him during this presidential election. Did you understand what that reference was to?
Why wouldn't I believe that there was corruption in that country, that in some form or fashion the president came to believe that these folks were not for him? And so I think human nature is to say, look, until I get comfortable that these are people who are not corrupt, that are not going to try to do harm to me, either politically or otherwise, I'm going to be kind of holding them at arm's length.
Experts say the corruption in Ukraine is legendary, and there's been some reporting suggesting that the Ukrainians supposedly in 2016 may have worked with Democrats to help advance Hillary Clinton against Trump. So Perry seems to be saying here that it was reasonable for President Trump to conclude the Ukrainians were against him.
That's right, and Perry doesn't believe that the president in this case did anything untoward, as he put it to me. Most important, the account that the secretary provided to me of key meetings and conversations clashed sharply with some others' accounts from the closed-door testimony. So if and when he testifies publicly, Perry will be a critical witness for the president. I asked if he didn't feel a bit like a Hitchcock character getting caught up in this impeachment frenzy. Perry hearkened back to a politically motivated criminal prosecution that was launched against him in his final days as governor of Texas that was ultimately thrown out of court.
But the damage had been done. So, yeah, I might say that I've seen this movie before, and I don't believe that a lot of the participants are interested in really getting to justice. They're interested in a political outcome. We've got a lot of great projects around the world that we could be working on, but the Hill seems to be so focused on trying to stick a fork in this president, or at least prick him, that we're missing what our real job is. Our real job is to do the work of the American people. And I just see this as such a waste of time.
Well, House Democrats definitely don't see this as a waste of time. In fact, they're arguing that democracy is at stake in all of this.
That's right, Cheryl. And the Intelligence Committee hearings that are going to start soon will then give way to an effort by the House Judiciary Committee to draft actual articles of impeachment on which the full House will then vote, likely before Christmas.
Thanks for telling us more about this interview, and I know you'll keep us posted.
Thank you.
Thanks, James. We're back with a look ahead next week on Full Measure right after this. In this week's Follow the Money, alarming amounts of waste in our healthcare system. A recent study published in the Journal of the American Medical Association found that 25% of our medical spending may be wasted money. The annual cost of all that waste was somewhere between $760 and $935 billion. That's due to several factors, including overtreatment, administrative time waste, or pricing failures. Another factor, fraud and abuse, taking up to $83.9 billion each year. You might be surprised or not to find out that's not a new problem. Prior studies have shown even higher amounts of waste. Next week on Full Measure, a reality check on President Trump's promise to build a border wall. How much progress has really been made? Was there a fence that you crossed? How did you cross?
Up in the mountains.
Where there was no fence?
Just a barbed wire fence.
A status report next week. Until then, we'll be holding powers accountable. I'm Sharyl Attkisson.